San Juan, Puerto Rico, 1971. A woman sits alone in a cafe on Calle del Cristo. She orders café con leche. She opens a newspaper. She circles 3 numbers in the classified section. She leaves exact change on the table. She walks out. 48 hours later, 20 kilograms of pure heroin arrive in Harlem. No phone calls, no witnesses, no trail. Her name is Julie Farrait, and while the world knows Frank Lucas as the king who broke the Italian mafia's stranglehold on Harlem, they don't know the truth. Julie wasn't just his wife. She was his general, his architect, the invisible hand that built an empire the feds couldn't see and the Italians couldn't touch. Frank Lucas moved $100 million in heroin through New York City between 1968 and 1975. 100 million. But here's what they don't tell you. Frank didn't speak Spanish. Frank didn't know the suppliers. Frank never set foot in the poppy fields of Southeast Asia without someone translating, negotiating, protecting him. That someone was Julie. She was Puerto Rican, fluent in Spanish, beautiful enough to disarm suspicion, smart enough to create a communication system so sophisticated that the DEA wouldn't crack it until 1975, 4 years after they started looking. But this isn't a love story. This is a story about power, about the woman who held the keys to the kingdom while her king sat on the throne, about the price of loyalty when the feds kick down your door and offer you a choice: betray him or die in prison. The code she used wasn't complex. It was elegant. Newspaper classifieds, grocery lists, birthday cards, messages hidden in plain sight, written in a language only she and her suppliers understood. While Frank became a legend for his blue magic heroin, 98% pure, delivered straight from the Golden Triangle, Julie became a ghost. Untouchable, invisible, until she wasn't. Because in 1975, Detective Richie Roberts and his team finally broke the code. They found the notebooks. They intercepted the messages. And when they arrested Frank Lucas, they didn't just take down a king. They took down a queen who had been running the operation from the shadows. But here's the question nobody asks. When the feds offered Frank a deal, testify against the mafia or spend the rest of your life in prison, why did he take it? And when Julie stood in that courtroom, watching her husband become a rat, why did she stay silent? The answer is buried in San Juan, in the coded messages she sent, in the loyalty she kept, in the empire she built with nothing but a newspaper and a pen. This is the story of Julie Farrait, the woman who taught Frank Lucas how to be invisible, the woman who became the most dangerous person in Harlem without ever firing a shot, and the woman who paid the ultimate price for keeping secrets. She was born where the ocean met the rust. Tin roofs, dust roads, roosters screaming at dawn like they were owed something. San Juan in the 1950s wasn't a paradise, it was a forge. While tourists saw white sand and palm trees, Julie Farrait saw a hierarchy carved out of heat, sweat, and desperation. Her father gambled. Her mother prayed. The landlord knocked loud, and the refrigerator stayed empty. By 12, she understood the math of hunger. If you smile, men give you things. If you listen, they give you secrets. And secrets are worth more than money. She learned to survive before she learned to dream. Watch the dockworkers, watch the sailors, watch the quiet men with pressed shirts and no calluses on their hands. She paid attention to who shook whose hand, who carried bags, who left with nothing. She didn't know the word logistics yet, but she understood the game. Product, movement, profit, all invisible, all happening in front of people too blind to see. By 21, she was working as a hostess at Club Caribbean, one of the most exclusive nightclubs in San Juan. Dark room, red lights, rum on every table, men coming in loud and leaving broke. She wore a dress that made them stare, and a stare that made them shut up when she wanted. She spoke Spanish, English, and enough French to impress the European tourists. But her most dangerous language was silence. She watched the local dealers move product, saw how the money changed hands, saw the mistakes they made, the flashiness, the noise, the ego. She understood that moving contraband wasn't about muscle. It was about flow. Then one night in 1965, he walked in. Frank Lucas. Not the legend. Not the king. Not yet. Just Bumpy Johnson's crotch, a weapon that didn't know how to aim. He wore a suit that cost more than the bartender made in a decade. He was loud. He was visible. He was a target. Frank looked at Julie and saw what every other man saw: a homecoming queen. A trophy. He thought he was the predator and she was the prey. He was wrong. The club owner whispered in Julie's ear, "That's the guy from New York, Bumpy's boy. He needs someone who speaks Spanish. Go, smile. But don't be stupid." She walked over to Frank's table. He didn't look up right away. "Power move, test. You Frank?" she asked. He looked up slow, saw the beauty first like everyone else did. Then, a second later, he saw the eyes. Cold. Calculating. Not a girl looking for a drink, a woman looking for leverage. "Who's asking?" he said. "Depends who's paying," she shot back. His mouth twitched. Not a full smile, just enough to say, "Okay, she's different." Frank was trying to close a deal with a Dominican supplier who smelled the American's ignorance from a mile away. The Dominican was smiling, nodding, and inflating the price by 40% because Frank didn't speak the language. Frank was getting agitated. The tension in the room was a lit fuse. Violence was seconds away. That's when Julie stepped in. She didn't ask for permission. She simply sat at the table. She looked at the Dominican supplier and spoke rapid-fire Spanish. She didn't translate Frank's anger. She translated his leverage. She told the supplier that if he ripped off this American, the pipeline to New York would close forever. She turned a robbery into a partnership. Within 20 minutes, the price dropped. The terms changed. Payment schedule, delivery points, purity guarantees, all tightened in their favor. At one point, the supplier raised his voice. Julie didn't back down. She leaned in, lowered hers. "You don't want us as enemies," she said quietly. "And you really don't want Harlem as an enemy. So you're going to give us the respect we're owed, or you're going to end up selling powder to kids on the beach for the rest of your life." The man stared at her. Saw something he didn't expect. Intelligence with teeth. He broke first. "Est bien," he exhaled. "Okay. We do it your way." Back outside, Frank lit a cigarette and watched the smoke curl into the San Juan sky. "You changed my numbers," he said. "Not angry, just stating facts." "Your numbers were stupid," she replied. "You would have overpaid. They would have owned you." "You think you know this game better than me?" he asked. She stepped closer. "No fear. I know my part of it better than you." "You want to be king?" "Fine, but kings fall when they don't know the cost of their own crown." He stared at her for a long moment. "What's your price?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't want your money. I want a seat at the table. Not as your girl, as your partner." That word hung between them. Partner. Dangerous word. Powerful word. Frank realized something that night. If he wanted to build something the Italians couldn't touch, he needed Julie Farrait. Their relationship wasn't romantic at first, it was transactional. Frank needed someone who could navigate the Spanish-speaking drug world. Julie needed someone with ambition and connections in New York. They were two hungry people who recognized hunger in each other. By 1968, they were married. But this wasn't a traditional marriage, this was a merger. Frank ran the streets, soldiers, corners, enforcers, fire and noise. Julie ran the shadows, suppliers, routes, timetables. Silence and order. One night in their Harlem apartment, Julie sat at the kitchen table with a copy of the New York Times classified section. Frank watched her circle 3 numbers, write a short phrase in Spanish, and close the newspaper. "What's that?" he asked. "An order," she said. "For what? Furniture? For 20 keys." He frowned. "No phones? No meetings?" She shook her head. "Phones get tapped. Meetings get raided. Paper gets ignored. We talk to San Juan in here, and the whole world thinks we're just buying cars." She looked up, eyes hard. "If you want to build an empire, you need to learn how to be invisible." The Italians shout. The cops listen. We whisper. They never hear us. She slid the folded newspaper across the table. "Tomorrow this goes out. And if they read it right, 48 hours from now, the first real shipment lands." But someone was watching. In a back room of a Little Italy cafe, 2 Italian soldiers were already talking about a problem in Harlem. A new player, new product, too pure, too cheap. One of them dropped a newspaper on the table. "You see this?" he said. "Something about a blue Chevy 98K 20K firm." The other shrugged. "It's a car ad, who cares?" The first man narrowed his eyes. "Yeah," he muttered, "but something about it feels wrong." In Harlem, Julie's ad went to print. In San Juan, a supplier circled the same words and smiled, and the Italians, without knowing it yet, had just started watching. Harlem was loud. Puerto Rico was quiet. Frank owned the noise. Julie ruled the silence. On 116th Street, Frank Lucas walked like a king. Blue magic had turned him into a legend. 98% pure heroin flooding the streets, making junkies weep with gratitude and dealers beg for territory. Frank wore mink coats in summer and shook hands like he was blessing the faithful. He was the lightning rod, the target, the man every Fed wanted to cage and every Italian wanted to kill. But a king without supply is just a loud man with a crown. Julie understood what Frank never could in the drug game. Communication kills more empires than bullets. Phones get tapped. Meetings get photographed. Messengers get arrested and flip faster than pancakes. The moment you speak out loud about weight, purity, or money, someone with a badge is listening. So Julie didn't speak. She wrote. But not in ways anyone would recognize. She built her empire on the most boring pages of the New York Times. Every Tuesday morning, Julie sat at their kitchen table with coffee and a red pen. Frank thought she was reading the news. She was writing the future. She drafted classified ads for the automotive section that looked like desperate housewives selling family cars. 1967 Chevy, blue, excellent condition, 98K miles, asking 20K, serious buyers only. To the editor approving the ad, it was standard copy. To the average reader scanning for a used car, it was just another listing. To the supplier in San Juan who bought the international edition of the Times, it was a purchase order written in perfect code. Blue meant the product. Blue Magic Heroin. 98K meant purity requirement. 98%, no exceptions. 20K meant weight, 20 kilograms. The model year contained the timeline. 1967 meant delivery in 7 days. If she wrote 1964, it meant 4 days. 1969 meant 9 days. Simple, elegant, invisible. When classified ads were too slow, she weaponized sentiment. Julie sent dozens of birthday cards to Cousin Maria and Aunt Sophia in Puerto Rico. Hallmark cards with flowers and puppies that made customs agents smile instead of search. A card with a garden scene reading "Hoping you enjoy your 15th year." Love always looked like family affection. But to the recipient, 15 meant kilos, and the 15th meant delivery date. Wedding invitations meant operations were paused. Sympathy cards meant a shipment had been intercepted. Christmas cards in July meant change the route immediately. She turned the United States Postal Service into her personal military communication network. But the real genius wasn't the code. It was the misdirection. While DIA agents tapped Frank's phones and followed his soldiers, Julie shopped at Bergdorf Goodman on Fifth Avenue. While federal investigators built conspiracy charts with Frank's name in the center, Julie had lunch at Le Cirque with other mob wives, discussing nothing more dangerous than fashion and gossip. She played the role perfectly. The trophy wife, the arm candy, the beautiful woman who didn't ask questions about her husband's business. And everyone believed it, because that's what they wanted to believe. The feds couldn't imagine that a woman, especially a beautiful Puerto Rican woman, could be the logistical mastermind behind a $100 million heroin operation. They were hunting for the tough guy in the back room making calls and giving orders. They weren't looking for the woman in the Chanel dress circling classified ads over breakfast. Every 6 weeks, Julie flew to San Juan. Not private jets, not with bodyguards, commercial flights, first class, carrying nothing but summer dresses and Vogue magazines. If customs stopped her, all they would find were lipstick and vacation clothes. She looked exactly like what her passport claimed, a wealthy housewife visiting family. The meetings never happened in back rooms or dark alleys. That's how men conducted business, and that's why men got caught. Julie met her contacts in the most public places imaginable. A crowded cafe on Calle del Cristo, where conversations disappeared into the clatter of plates and coffee cups. A pew in the Cathedral of San Juan Bautista, where whispers vanished into hymns and prayers. A beach towel at Isla Verde, where the ocean drowned out voices and tourists provided perfect cover. She never wrote anything down. No ledgers, no phone numbers, no names. Everything lived in her memory, faces, routes, payment schedules, backup plans. She could sit across from a man who had killed to reach his position, sip iced tea, and negotiate the transport of $2 million worth of heroin without her pulse rising above 60 beats per minute. Her suppliers called her La Fantasma, the ghost. Back in New York, the DIA was drowning in Frank Lucas paperwork. They had photographs of him at nightclubs, transcripts of him arguing with lieutenants. They knew his tailor, his barber, his favorite restaurant. The file on Frank Lucas was 4 inches thick. The file on Julie Farrait was 1 page. Occupation, none. Status, spouse. While federal agents worked overtime trying to decipher Frank's street slang on wiretaps, Julie was moving 50 kilograms of heroin per month through a communication system so archaic and domestic that sophisticated surveillance teams didn't know it existed. The Italians were hemorrhaging territory, their supply lines drying up, their product looking like baby powder compared to blue magic. They assumed Frank had a massive organization with military precision. His organization was one woman with a newspaper subscription and a box of birthday cards. By 1971, the Lucas empire was generating $15 million per month. 15 million. The mafia families who had controlled Harlem for decades were watching their kingdom crumble, and they couldn't figure out how a country boy from North Carolina had outmaneuvered them. They were looking for soldiers, suppliers, and sophisticated networks. They should have been looking for a woman who understood that the most dangerous weapon in the drug trade isn't a gun. It's invisibility. But invisibility has a price. Success creates heat. And heat draws hunters. It started with a junior DIA agent named Patterson who was bored, ambitious, and looking for a career making case. He wasn't investigating Julie specifically. He was running routine cross-references on flight manifests, looking for patterns in cash transactions and frequent travel. The name Farrait kept appearing on flights to San Juan. Same airline. Same schedule. Every 6 weeks, like clockwork. He didn't know what it meant. But he made a note. 3 weeks later, Julie was standing at Gate 12 in JFK Airport, waiting to board her regular flight to Puerto Rico. She wore a silk Hermes scarf and carried a leather handbag that cost more than most people's cars. To everyone around her, she looked like exactly what she was supposed to be, a wealthy woman going home to visit family. But something felt wrong. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. Not a sound, not a sight, just instinct. The same instinct that had kept her alive since she was 12 years old and learned to read danger in men's eyes. She adjusted her scarf and used the reflection in a duty-free shop window to scan the terminal behind her. 50 feet away, a man in a gray suit sat reading a newspaper. He wasn't turning pages. He was watching her over the rim, her heart hammered against her ribs. But her face remained stone. This was the moment every criminal dreads and every smart criminal prepares for. The binary choice that defines everything that comes after. If she boarded the plane, she led them to the suppliers. If she turned around and left, she confirmed their suspicions. Kingdom or safety. Throne or ghost. The gate agent announced first-class boarding. Julie picked up her bag. She didn't walk toward the gate. She didn't walk toward the exit. She walked straight to the ladies' room, moving with the casual confidence of a woman who had nowhere urgent to be. The man in the gray suit folded his newspaper and stood up. Inside the restroom, Julie locked herself in a stall and made the calculation that would determine whether the empire lived or died. She could abort the trip, protect the suppliers, and signal to Frank that the heat was closing in. Or she could continue the charade, maintain the schedule, and risk leading federal agents directly to the heart of their operation. She thought about Frank's favorite lesson from Bumpy Johnson: the silent man lives. The loud man dies. But what happens when the silent woman gets seen? Julie flushed the toilet she hadn't used, washed her hands she didn't need to wash, and walked back into the terminal. The man in the gray suit was gone. But that didn't mean the danger had passed. It meant the game had changed. She approached the gate agent with a smile that could disarm suspicion and melt surveillance cameras. "Excuse me," she said sweetly. "I need to change my flight to tomorrow. Family emergency." As she walked away from Gate 12, Julie Farrait made a decision that would reshape the entire Lucas operation. The ghost had been spotted. Now she had to figure out how to disappear while staying in plain sight. The empire had been built on invisibility. Now it would be tested by exposure. And in Harlem, Frank Lucas had no idea that his queen was about to make the most dangerous move of her life. The mansion in Teaneck sat like a fortress built from blood money and bad decisions. 12 rooms, marble floors that echoed every footstep like gunshots, crystal chandeliers that caught light like diamonds and threw it back like warnings. Frank Lucas walked those halls like a king surveying his kingdom, because for a moment in 1972, he almost was one. Blue magic had turned Harlem into his personal mint, 50 kilograms a month. $15 million flowing through their hands like water through a broken dam. Cash stacked in closets, rubber banded in shoeboxes, hidden behind false walls. They had beaten the Italians. They had outsmarted the feds. They were untouchable. And that word, untouchable, was exactly what terrified Julie. She moved through that same mansion like a ghost haunted by her own success. Every dollar had a source. Every kilo had a route. Every day brought them closer to the edge of a cliff Frank refused to see. Power was a drug, and Frank was overdosing. Julie understood dosage. Frank had forgotten the prescription. The first sign of the sickness was vanity. Frank stopped dressing like Bumpy Johnson had taught him. Quiet, invisible, forgettable. He started dressing like he wanted to be remembered. $5,000 suits, custom shoes, jewelry that caught streetlights and police attention in equal measure. He wasn't just successful anymore. He was performing success. And performance, in their world, was suicide with an audience. Julie tried reasoning with him first, quiet conversations over breakfast where she reminded him of the lessons that had kept them alive. "The loudest man in the room is the weakest man in the room," she said, watching him adjust a gold watch that cost more than most people's cars. "Bumpy's dead," Frank replied. "His way died with him. This is my way now." "Your way gets us killed," Julie shot back. "Visibility is vulnerability. The more they see you, the more they hunt you." Frank laughed. "Let them hunt. I'm faster than all of them." He was wrong, and Julie knew it the moment she saw the coat. Chinchilla. Floor length. Gray as smoke and twice as expensive. $100,000 of dead fur lying across their bed like a confession waiting to be signed. Frank stood in front of the mirror, grinning, running his hands down the sleeves like he was petting a weapon. "What do you think?" he asked. Julie did the math in her head. 1 coat. 1 photograph. 1 file folder at the DIA with Frank's name underlined in red. "I think you just bought your own coffin," she said quietly. He wore it anyway. March 8, 1971. Madison Square Garden. Alley versus Frazier. The fight of the century. Frank didn't just attend, he arrived. Ringside seats. Chinchilla coat. Matching hat. Cameras everywhere, catching everything, preserving the moment when Frank Lucas announced to the world that he was the king of Harlem. Somewhere in the crowd, Detective Richie Roberts was taking pictures. Not for memories. For evidence. The photograph would land on Roberts' desk 3 days later. Frank Lucas, front and center, grinning like a man who believed his own legend. Roberts circled the face with a red marker and wrote one word underneath, target. Back in Teaneck, the arguments became wars, screaming matches behind closed doors that shook the mansion's foundation. "You put a bullseye on our backs," Julie shouted, her voice cracking with fury and fear. "I put respect on our name." Frank fired back. "The Italians know. The cops know. Everyone knows who runs Harlem now. Respect?" Julie stepped closer, her eyes ice cold. Bumpy had respect because nobody knew his face. "You don't have respect, Frank. You have a death wish." Julie responded the only way she knew how, discipline. She stopped traveling to San Juan personally. Too dangerous. Too visible. She trained intermediaries instead, women who looked like housewives and traveled like tourists. She burned every notebook, every receipt, every piece of paper that could connect her to the operation. She changed the codes every 90 days, rotating between classified ads, greeting cards, and grocery receipts. She was building firewalls around an empire that Frank was trying to set on fire. But she couldn't control his ego. And ego in their world was a cancer that spread faster than bullets. The Italians noticed the new king. The feds noticed the chinchilla coat. And Detective Richie Roberts noticed that the ghost haunting Harlem finally had a face. In his cramped office, Roberts pinned Frank's photograph to a corkboard and smiled. The hunt wasn't theoretical anymore. It was personal. The invisible empire had just become visible. And the only question left was whether Julie Farrait could save the kingdom from the man who built it. The clock was ticking. The walls were closing in, and Frank Lucas, drunk on his own power, couldn't hear the sound of his empire beginning to crumble. The end didn't start with gunfire or explosions. It started with a nobody named Jimmy Torres, who drove a dented Buick and talked too much when pressure found his throat. Low-level courier. Bottom feeder. The kind of man who moved packages without asking questions because questions required intelligence he didn't possess. September 1973, routine traffic stop in the Bronx. Broken taillight. But when the cop smelled something wrong and searched the trunk, Jimmy's world collapsed into 3 kilos of blue magic and a choice between 20 years in federal prison or giving up something valuable. He chose survival over loyalty in under 5 minutes. "There's a storage unit," he whispered. "South Bronx. I just go there when they tell me. Take what they say. That's it." The key he handed over wasn't just metal. It was the blade that would cut the Lucas Empire's throat. Detective Richie Roberts drove to that storage unit himself at dawn with a warrant, bolt cutters, and a photographer who documented everything. Unit 247. Climate controlled. When they rolled up the metal door, Roberts thought he had found Frank's diary. Financial ledgers, supplier contacts, transaction records dating back to 1968. But as he flipped through the notebooks, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The handwriting was too elegant, too precise, too feminine. These weren't Frank's records. They were Julie's. Roberts sat on the concrete floor for 3 hours, reading page after page of what looked like grocery lists and birthday wishes. At first, he thought they were decoys. But Roberts was a hunter, and hunters recognize patterns even when they're disguised as noise. He brought in Professor Elena Vasquez from Columbia University, a linguist who specialized in Caribbean Spanish dialects and coded communication. She worked for 6 days straight, drinking coffee that tasted like regret and deciphering messages that had been hiding in plain sight for 7 years. When she finally cracked the pattern, she looked up at Roberts with something close to admiration. "Whoever wrote this is a genius," she said quietly. "This isn't just code. This is architecture." The realization hit Roberts like a physical blow. Frank Lucas was the face everyone saw sitting on the throne. But Julie Farrait was the kingdom itself. She was the architect, the logistician, the invisible hand that had turned a street dealer into a drug lord, the woman who had outsmarted the entire federal government for 7 years using nothing but newspapers and birthday cards. January 28, 1975. Dawn broke over Teaneck like a judgment. 16 federal agents surrounded the Lucas mansion with warrants, weapons, and the weight of 7 years of investigation behind them. They kicked in the mahogany doors at 6:15 in the morning, while Frank and Julie were still asleep in Egyptian cotton sheets. Frank reached for the nightstand. An agent put a gun to his head and said the only words that mattered: "It's over." They arrested Frank, Julie, and 4 of their top associates, seized $573,000 in cash, found 2 kilos of blue magic in a hidden safe. The king and queen were dragged out in handcuffs while news cameras captured the fall of Harlem's invisible empire. But the real devastation came 3 months later in federal interrogation rooms, where choices were made that would define legacies forever. The feds offered Frank a deal. Simple arithmetic. Cooperate and get 15 years. Stay silent and die in prison. They wanted names: corrupt cops who had been taking bribes, mafia members who had been working with the Lucas organization, everyone who had helped Frank build his kingdom. Frank took the deal. He became a rat. He gave up names like he was reading from a phone book. Detectives who had been on his payroll, Italian mobsters who had been his partners. He destroyed the very people who had protected him, enriched him, kept him alive. In the women's section of the Metropolitan Correctional Center, Julie sat in a cell and heard about Frank's betrayal through the prison grapevine. The feds came to her next. Same deal. Same offer. Testify and walk in 5 years. Stay silent and grow old behind bars. Julie looked at the federal prosecutor like he had just insulted her dead mother. I have nothing to say, she said. Your husband is cooperating, the prosecutor pressed. He's giving up everyone. Julie's face remained stone. I don't owe you anything either. She took her sentence without blinking. 5 years in federal prison for conspiracy to distribute narcotics. She never testified, never cooperated, never betrayed a single person. While Frank Lucas became infamous as the mobster who snitched, Julie Farrait became legendary as the woman who kept the code of silence even when silence cost her everything. The day of sentencing, they passed each other in the courthouse hallway. Frank in an orange jumpsuit, head down, avoiding eye contact. Julie in the same uniform, head high, walking like she still owned the room. As the guards prepared to separate them forever, Julie stopped. She planted her feet and waited until Frank was forced to look up. Was it worth it? She asked quietly. Not angry. Just curious. To be a king for a day, just to be a rat for a lifetime? Frank said nothing. The doors closed between them. The loud man spoke and destroyed his legacy. The silent woman said nothing and preserved hers. The empire was gone. The money was gone. But in the end, only one of them kept their soul, and that difference would echo through the criminal underworld for decades, a reminder that loyalty isn't just a word. It's a choice. And choices, once made, define who you really are when everything else falls away. The code was broken, but the woman who wrote it remained unbroken. And sometimes, in a world built on betrayal, that's the only victory that matters. Prison didn't break her, it stripped her down to essence. 5 years in federal lockup where concrete walls pressed against dreams and steel doors clanged shut on empires. While Frank Lucas sat in prosecutor offices singing songs about corrupt cops and mafia partnerships, Julie Farrait folded laundry in Danbury Federal Correctional Institution and practiced the art she had mastered on the streets, disappearing in plain sight. She woke at dawn, worked in silence, read Spanish novels that nobody else could understand. When other inmates bragged about their crimes, their connections, their plans for revenge, Julie said nothing. Some tried to test her. A woman twice her size walked up in the yard one afternoon, looking to build reputation on Julie's legend. They say you used to be Queen of Harlem, the woman sneered. What you now? Julie looked at her with the same calm she had used to stare down federal prosecutors. Alive, she said quietly. You should aim for that first. The woman walked away. Respect in prison doesn't come from noise. It comes from the ability to stand in chaos and choose silence. January 1981. The gates opened. No cameras, no reporters, no Hollywood producers waving contracts. Julie Farrait walked out of federal prison, carrying everything she owned in a plastic bag, and disappeared into the morning like smoke. She took the first flight back to Puerto Rico, back to the island that had taught her hunger and survival, and became what she had always been, invisible. While Julie rented a small house near the coast where ocean waves drowned out memory, Frank Lucas was building a different kind of empire. Celebrity. He sold his story to Hollywood, sat for interviews where he bragged about Blue Magic and Bumpy Johnson, appeared on talk shows like a reformed gangster sharing wisdom about the streets. In 2007, Denzel Washington played him in American Gangster, turning his betrayal into mythology, his cooperation into legend. But when reporters asked about Julie, Frank's bravado cracked. She was smarter than me, he would mutter, looking away. She always was. It was the closest thing to an apology he ever gave. Julie refused every interview, declined every book deal, turned down every documentary producer who tracked down her address. The woman who had built $100 million empire using birthday cards and classified ads refused to decode herself for public consumption. She understood what Frank never learned. True power isn't about being seen. It's about being felt but never found. Her legacy didn't disappear. It evolved. Modern drug trafficking organizations study Julie Farrait's methods without knowing her name. Coded messages hidden in social media posts, public meeting places that provide cover instead of secrecy. Female operatives running logistics because law enforcement still underestimates women. DEA agents training in Quantico examine her communication systems as examples of sophisticated tradecraft. She didn't just help Frank build an empire, she wrote the blueprint for staying invisible in a world designed to expose you. Frank Lucas died on May 30, 2019, surrounded by the ghosts of everyone he had betrayed. The obituaries called him a legend, a snitch, a survivor. Most mentioned Julie in passing, a footnote to his mythology, as if she had been decoration instead of foundation. Julie Farrait is still alive today, living quietly in Puerto Rico. She buys groceries, drinks coffee, watches the ocean. To her neighbors, she is a polite elderly woman who keeps to herself. They have no idea the hands holding that coffee cup once held the keys to the Golden Triangle. They don't know the eyes watching those waves once stared down federal agents and refused to blink. She never sought redemption because she doesn't believe she needs it. Never sought fame because she knows fame is a trap. In a world obsessed with visibility, where every criminal wants a reality show and every snitch wants a podcast, Julie Farrait pulled off the ultimate power move. She won by refusing to play their game. Frank got the movie, the interviews, the applause of people who didn't understand the cost. Julie got something more valuable: her dignity, her silence, her unbroken code. So who really won, the king who sold his kingdom to save his skin, or the queen who went to prison to protect her crown? Loyalty is expensive. It costs years. It costs freedom. It costs recognition. But looking at Julie Farrait today, living in peace while Frank Lucas's legacy drowns in the noise of his own betrayal, you have to wonder, maybe silence wasn't just her weapon. Maybe it was the only victory worth fighting for. The empire is gone. The money is gone. Frank is gone. But Julie Farrait remains, still silent, still invisible, still the most dangerous woman nobody ever saw coming. And in a world where everyone wants to be remembered, she proved that sometimes the greatest power is choosing to be forgotten.